The Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday was repeating ideas which had been put forward yesterday morning by Ben Wallace. Alicia Kearns, the Conservative MP, said that she thinks that Israel has broken international law. And so that's one point. And the second point, which is perhaps more important, Israel's current trajectory will lend greater support for Hamas among Palestinians, but also among neighbouring nations. Her line is that bombs don't obliterate an ideology, and neither can a stable state be constructed from oblivion. Yesterday morning, Ben Wallace, who has a background in the military and had been our defence secretary, he seems in so many ways to be a thoughtful, sound individual, but he knows what he's talking about. And he criticises Israel for behaving like a bull in a china shop, and crashing from one crisis to another in a killing rage. And he says that this is something that will fuel the conflict for another 50 years. And he draws parallels between Israel's attack on Hamas, however justified, has parallels to the British attempts to suppress the IRA campaign during the 1970s, 1980s, and a death toll of nearly 20,000 Palestinian people killed in response to the appalling terrorist atrocity on October the 7th, which killed 1,200 people, also injured a huge number of people, is simply a breeding ground, a recruiting sergeant for Hamas. And I've worried for a while that there isn't a clear view of what comes after, except a rejection, as we heard last week, of the two-state solution, which is simply taking a sledgehammer to diplomacy in the same way as Netanyahu took a sledgehammer to the whole idea of justice after October the 7th. There were ways in which Israel could enlist international support, and international support was queuing up, was ready to be invoked, used, and a range of neighbouring and global nations were standing with Israel in response to the terrorist attack. And even today, very few nations are ready to recognize that Hamas has legitimacy, and that Hamas has a future. Very few nations. And those that do, I think, would also at the same time qualify their support for Hamas by actively condemning the terrorist event of October the 7th. My own personal view is that the longer Israel continues with its campaign, with its military campaign, the more chance there is that Hamas will survive, and that it will be the terrorist wing of Hamas which survives. It would just simply go underground, and the only way that Hamas should have survived is as a political organization that recognizes its future is in negotiation and words, not in bullets and bombs. And the Israeli campaign should have focused on the peaceful resolution. Ben Wallace says we're entering a dangerous period now where Israel's original legal authority of self-defense is undermined by its own actions. It is making the mistake of losing its moral authority alongside its legal one. I'm sure that the shame Benjamin Netanyahu feels for not foreseeing the October the 7th attacks is deep, especially for someone who presents himself as a security hawk and a tough guy. But perhaps the shame is driving him to lose sight of the long term. If he thinks a killing range will rectify matters, then he's very wrong. His methods will not solve the problem. In fact, I believe his tactics will fuel the conflict for another 50 years. His actions are radicalizing Muslim youth across the globe. And the response to this article by, for example, the Israeli spokesperson eylon levy, that this is unfortunate language and that Israel was instead putting in place unprecedented measures to get civilians out of harm's way. Well, I don't see that is true, I'm afraid. The most recent news about the hostages is that 3 of them were killed at point-blank range because it was impossible to identify the hostages as Israeli rather than Hamas terrorists. The longer this campaign goes on, the more trigger-happy the battle-hardened veterans in the Israeli army will become. And the harder it will be to claim that they are on the side of right. And people will look back, as they look back on Bloody Sunday, to the moment when the actions of the defensive actions of a nation and of an occupying power are directly responsible for the recruitment to a terrorist organization. eylon levy says what will radicalize a new generation is if the terrorists who burned people alive and tortured children in front of their parents and raped Israeli women and girls literally get away with murder. I think we've gone beyond that argument. And that is the problem.